أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي. In chapter 16, Surah An-Nahl, verse number 90, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Verily, Allah enjoins and commands to justice and the doing of good and the giving to the family, and He forbids indecency and evil and rebellion. The issue of justice is very important in Islam. We say that God is just, that He never commits cruelty. However, sometimes people question belief in God because of tragic events, a loss of a loved one, a serious sickness, the loss of a job that puts somebody in great financial difficulty, loss of a house, a divorce, and so on, can cause a person to be so emotionally affected and experience so much pain that they question the justice of God. They wonder how a merciful, loving, and compassionate God could allow these things, either from the actions of other human beings, and sometimes God be the one who causes this hardship Himself. So in order to look at this rationally, we have to, as we always say, look into the definition of the words that we're using. So we're talking about justice. And in justice, in Islam, justice means putting everything in its proper place and giving everything that it deserves. And the opposite of this will be injustice, oppression, and tyranny. So justice would be rewarding good with a reward, and it will be punishing evil with punishment. The opposite of that will be injustice, will be backwards. It will be punishing someone who's good and rewarding those who are evil. And in discussing the issue of justice, it is inevitable that we get to the concept of equality. Sometimes people want justice, so they say that we have to have equality across the board in order to be fair and just. Equality means to give everyone or everything the same. But equality is not always justice. Sometimes it is just, sometimes it's not just. But the standard by which we judge equality is justice. We don't judge justice by the standard of equality, we judge equality by the standard of justice. For example, a teacher can practice equality in the classroom and give all of her students the same grade on an exam. This would be equality, but this would not be justice. This would be unjust, because justice and fairness would be that the teacher should give a grade to each student according to his or her performance on that test. The student who answers everything correctly should get a high score, and the ones who give less correct answers, they should get a lower score. This will be justice, and this is proper. So now when we talk about justice, and we're talking about the justice of God, as we explained yesterday, we have to ask whether or not it is rationally even possible for God to act without justice. So injustice, oppression, tyranny, evil, all of these things are committed for certain reasons. And basically they're committed for two reasons. One is out of ignorance, and the other is out of weakness. So I am ignorant of the right way to do something, so I do it in an evil way. Or I am ignorant that what I am doing is wrong. I think it's right, but I don't know that it's wrong, so I commit it, and therefore I commit an evil. This is committing evil and injustice out of ignorance. The other is committing evil out of weakness, where I don't have the power or the strength or the resources to attain something, to get something in the righteous and just way. So I go and circumvent the just ways. I either steal, I take somebody's right, or so forth. I cheat, I lie. I do something in a corrupt way in order to achieve something. So, injustice is committed either through ignorance or weakness. So, is it possible for God to be just? Knowing this, we say no, because God is all-powerful, so there's no weakness in Him to have to go and do something evil because of weakness, and He is all-knowing. There is no ignorance attributable to God. He is all-knowing, so there is no way that He could do evil because of ignorance. And ultimately, He is also needless. He doesn't need anything from anyone, so there's no reason for Him to oppress. So none of these scenarios apply to God. Therefore, it is rationally impossible for God to commit evil. It's irrelevant to him. It doesn't apply. So we say also that even if God needed something, what do humans produce that God could ever need? What do we make that could ever benefit God that he could not simply just create for himself? Allah says in the Quran, Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 30, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَظْلِمُ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ. Verily, Allah does not do injustice even to the smallest amount. And as we've said before, that the consistency in nature shows that God is consistently just and fair. The fact that we are not immediately punished for all of the frequent injustices that we ourselves commit shows the depths of God's mercy. So not only is he just, but he goes beyond that and he is merciful. If he was only just, then none of us, or at least very few human beings would exist on this earth because of all the evil that we commit. Even so, people can't reconcile God's justice with the evil and oppression in the world. They still have difficulty understanding this. And this is because it's a reality that hardship and tragedy do exist in this world. But not all hardship is injustice. Natural disasters are not examples of injustice. First, it's rationally established that injustice is impossible for God. Second, natural disasters do not violate natural law, but they are a result of natural laws. It's the result of the consistent operation of the world, so it's not something that is unjust. Third, if we had the right knowledge and the ability, we would be able to protect ourselves from all of these natural disasters. So the fact that we suffer from the natural disasters is a result of our own inability. And fourth, sometimes the natural disasters are punishments for our sins. We could have brought that upon ourselves, so it may actually be a mercy from God that he punishes us in this world so that in the next world we stand before him with a clean slate. And in any case, God himself never commits any injustice. And it could also be that we think something is an injustice when it's not because of our limited knowledge and perspective. When we accept that our knowledge is limited, we might be a little bit more careful about passing judgments about God being unjust. If God were unjust, everything in existence would be annihilated for a few reasons. Number one, if God was unjust in the operation of the natural universe and he didn't manage the universe according to a perfect system of laws, basically the universe would be in chaos. If it wasn't following the rules, if the standards weren't applying, if the constants were constantly changing, we would not see this perfect system. We wouldn't be able to predict anything. Like we said before, we don't wake up in the morning wondering if gravity still works. If God was unjust, we would have to worry about that every single day. So the fact that we don't have to worry about these things means that God is just. And if he were unjust, there will be nobody to stop him from committing this injustice, so everything would be in chaos and probably annihilated. But the perfect harmony of the universe and the fact that we are still here testifies to God's justice. A question people have sometimes is, why does God let people do bad things? Of course, God wants us to be good. He has the power to force everyone to do good, so why does he let people do bad things? The reason is that God does not force people to do good, and he doesn't force them to do bad either. He has, in this temporary, limited world, allowed people to choose what they want to do. This is not a situation that's going to last forever. It's only for a few years. And since these people have a choice, they will be accountable for their actions. It's not as if God allows people to do whatever they want without any consequence. It's temporary, and as we said, there is an overall justice that is going to apply to them, which we will see in the afterlife. People also ask, why does God let bad things happen to good people? Allah himself explains that this world is a place of test and trial. And the hardships in life are here for different reasons. One, it's a chance for us to show our spiritual and moral development, to show our patience, to show our strength, to show our gratitude towards Allah. And these hardships are learning experiences for us. Sometimes we have to go through hardship in order to advance ourselves as human beings. Or these hardships, they teach us what is important in life. Sometimes when we have it too easy and we're too comfortable, we start to fall off the track. So Allah takes these comforts and these luxuries away from us to remind us about what is actually the priority in life. And these hardships, they make us stronger and better people. And sometimes these hardships are our own fault. We sin, Allah punishes us, and then we wonder where this punishment came from. But this punishment could be a mercy. Like there are narrations that say that one of the times that a person's slate is completely cleaned of record of sins is when that person is sick, and then they recover. When that person recovers, that's it. Their slate is clean. Their sins have been forgiven. Chapter 2, verse 155 of the Quran, Allah says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. And we will verily try you, test you, with some of fear and hunger and loss of property and lives and fruits. A loss of fruits, then he says, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, and give good news to the patient ones. الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ, that when a misfortune or tragedy afflicts them, قَالُوا, they say, إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ, verily we belong to Allah, and to Him we shall surely return. أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَبِّهِمْ وَرَحْمَةٌ, those are they on whom are blessings and mercy from their Lord. وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُهْتَدُونَ, and they are the ones who are followers of the right course. They are the ones who are guided. This is chapter 2, verses 155 to 157 of the Quran. So this world is a place of trial. It's a place of test. But it's temporary. And while it's temporary, Allah has given us all of the answers that we need in order to pass this test properly. Another issue that comes up when we're discussing the justice of God is the issue of predestination and free will. We know that atheists do not believe in the supernatural. So according to them, all that exists is a physical world governed by natural laws. According to materialism and atheism, we are composed of nothing but the atoms, nothing but the matter that make up our bodies. There's no soul, and there's no spirit to drive our thoughts or actions. If this is true, then all of existence, including our actions, our thoughts, our intentions, our minds, would be subject to the laws of nature and would not be able to do anything outside of those laws of nature. So thus, free will and individual choice would be impossible. They would be illusions. They would not be real. If a world is nothing but nature, then nothing will happen in that world except what is dictated by the laws of nature. So we start looking at it from the very smallest point. We think of an atom. An atom does not have free will. An atom moves around in space according to what is dictated by the natural laws. An atom doesn't say, you know what, I don't want to go that way, I want to go this way. It can't do that. It will go exactly where the natural laws say. It can't say, I don't want to combine with that other atom, I want to combine with this one instead. The laws dictate its motion and how it interacts with other particles. So it moves by set laws. Multiple atoms will then interact and combine to form molecules. But no matter how many combine together, the result is still just atoms that have no free will of their own. If it's one atom, if it's a trillion atoms. On this side it's one atom with no free will. Here it's a trillion atoms with no free will. So at any given moment, the atom only has one possible future as dictated by those laws. So now we look at ourselves. The human body physically is composed of these atoms. So since the individual atoms do not have any free will, then the human body also does not have any free will. If all that exists is matter and natural law, then what is true for that atom will also be true for the human. The future of the atom is predetermined by natural law, and if there's no soul, then the future of the human body, the human being, will also be predetermined by natural law. And thus the future of the entire universe will be predetermined. So, if atheism and materialism are true, and then there is no free will and everything is predetermined. And when we say free will, what we mean is that free will is the conscious decision to perform an action, a decision which is not forced or compelled. Like we are the ones that will this decision, we decide for ourselves. We do not mean absolute free will, which is impossible, which means I can do whatever I want. If I want to fly right now, I can fly. This is impossible. There are natural factors that limit our choices, so free will means the ability to decide a course of action within the range of possibilities. I can't do whatever I want, but there may be 100 choices for me to make, and I choose between these. So, once again, matter, the atoms, the molecules, the physical part of this world, they are compelled by natural law. We mean space, time, matter, energy, light, and so forth. So, in a world of matter and nothing but matter, everything is predetermined, and therefore everything is predictable. This is how we are able to predict natural events like the weather. You look at the forecast for tomorrow, it gives you a good idea of what the temperature is going to be, if it's going to be cloudy or sunny, if it's going to rain or snow. And the more we advance in the knowledge of the weather, the better we'll be able to predict. But if all that exists is matter, there's no room for choice, because choice is impossible for something that's predetermined. We predict the weather because the weather patterns develop according to the natural system. So an event that occurred in the past, like a rain shower, could not have occurred in any other way. So today, right now, we see the sun is shining outside. There is no other way that that weather could have turned out except as it is right now, because there's no choice out there. And all future events will occur according to natural laws. So, knowing all this, if human beings and our intentions and our choices are entirely material, just like the weather patterns, then all of these thoughts and actions will be predetermined, which means no choices, no free will, no individual decisions, no possibility to change our fate. It would mean that all human and non-human events of the world from the beginning until the end of time are already set in motion, they're already determined, and they are inevitable, meaning there is no way to stop it from happening, that there's only one way that it could happen, and it will happen that way. So without a supernatural agent like the soul to make decisions, free will cannot exist. So imagine a person has a glass of orange juice in front of them. So we would imagine that this person now has at least two choices. Either that person can drink the orange juice or not drink it. So at least there's two choices. Of course, there's a lot of things they can do with it, but at least those two choices. But if his mind and his body are nothing but material made from those atoms that don't have free will, then choice is impossible for him. His analysis of the choices, his decision, and the eventual action would all be determined by those natural laws. If he drinks, it's because that's what the natural laws led up to. If he doesn't drink, it's because that's what the natural laws determined. So there's no choice for him, because the only possible outcome is what the natural laws determine. So he cannot choose against nature if he is nothing but nature. It's like a boulder at the top of a hill. If we push it and it rolls down the hill, it's obviously going to do that. You push the boulder down, does the boulder say, no, I don't want to do that. I want to stay here. I want to roll up instead of rolling down. Impossible. No choice there. So if we are also nothing but matter, then all of our human actions are just like that boulder. Both are composed of material elements. Both are following natural laws. So the future for both of them is predetermined and inevitable, compelled by natural law. So, without free will, without this ability to make a decision that is independent of these natural laws, a person would not receive credit for any action, but the credit for that action would be shared among all of the contributing physical factors, because this is a world of cause and effect. So, the credit for any action would be divided among all of the causes that led up to that effect. A painting would be attributed to the paintbrush as much as to the painter, because if atheism and materialism is true, there's no soul. That means there's no primary point of origination for that action. Nobody who actually decided to do that action. Who decided to paint the painting? Well, the universe did, if there's no soul. So this is what we say, that without free will, Without the soul, all events will be inevitable happenings. This would absolve every criminal of his guilt and lay the blame entirely on the universe. Somebody commits murder, says, hey, I don't have a soul, I didn't choose it, the universe made me do it. And this would be perfectly valid for the person to say this. So if there's no soul, the murderer did not commit murder, the doctor didn't save any lives, they could say it was the universe or it was the atoms that did it. So all human endeavors throughout all of history have been set in stone by natural laws. All actions, good or bad, virtuous or evil, everything is done by the universe. If the mind is only matter, even the things that we believe, if I believe in God, it's because the universe made me believe. If I disbelieve in God, it's because the universe made me disbelieve. So the mind cannot overcome matter if it is matter itself. The only way that we can actually have a free will is if we have a factor within us that is separate from this physical universe that can decide to do something against what the universe is deciding. So one cannot act against nature if he is nothing but nature. So this is where religion teaches us that we have a soul. The soul has free will and makes choices. Now the physical world can affect the number of choices that we have, but the final decision is up to the person and not to the universe. And we say that free will is a self-evident truth. We automatically believe in free will. Without believing in free will, our actions, our society, the way that we live, the way that we judge, none of these would make any sense. So it's a foundation of human essence. It's a foundation of the judgments that we make. It's a foundation of our behavior. Free will is necessary for morality and reward and punishment. Without free will, there's no choice. Without choice, there's no morality, because morality requires you to have a choice between good and evil. No free will, no choice. No choice, no morality. No morality, it's meaningless to tell somebody, hey, you shouldn't kill that person. You shouldn't steal. It wouldn't make any sense if we don't have free will. So all actions in this situation would be of equal value or of zero value. So this is why it is important to recognize that with materialism, all of these things that make life worth living, that give us these values of justice and mercy, will be completely impossible with atheism and materialism, but everything would be of equal value. Murder would have the same value as keeping somebody alive. It is only belief in God and religion which gives us the ability to make the distinction between the two. Now we come to the question that some people ask, which they say that, okay, let's say you believe in free will, but you also believe in God, and you believe that God is all-knowing. So if God knows everything, then how can human beings have free will? So the argument goes something like this. They say God's knowledge is absolute. Correct? He knows everything that's going to happen. God's knowledge is absolute, so we cannot act against what God knows. God knows what a person will do before he does it. So if God knows what a person will do, then that action is the only possible action for that person to perform. If no other action is possible, there's no choice. If there's no choice, there's no free will. So they say that if God knows what you're going to do, you don't have free will. So there's a few problems with this argument. The first is that the argument assumes that God is limited by time. So I don't know what you're going to do in the future, but God does. So the only way that they can make this argument is to assume that God is limited by time. If God were limited by time, then his knowledge of the future would only be true if he forced people to act. So for example, if I say, brother, tomorrow you're going to be here at 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. So the only way I could really be sure of that, because I don't know the future, the only way I could make sure that that happens is if I force the brother to come here tomorrow at 10 a.m. But God knows the future before it happens, so he doesn't have to force them to do what his future knowledge has already made clear. So the argument assumes that God is limited by time. The argument also assumes that one being's knowledge somehow affects another being's free will. Why is it that God knowing what's going to happen in the future affects that person's free will in the future? Where is the connection between this? The people who make this argument, where they say if God knows everything, then you have no free will, they automatically assume somehow that there's a connection. But first they have to show that connection before I have to try to refute it. So it's not, the burden is not on me to show how a person has free will with God's knowledge, they have to first show me how God's knowledge of what they do in the future affects their free will in the future. So we say that God is not limited by time. He created time. He is not bound by the concept of past, present, and future. He can see the past, He can see the present, He can see the future with the same ease. There's no difficulty for Him. The argument assumes that knowledge of an action affects the free will of that action. So, if God's knowledge of the future affects the free will of people in the future, why should we limit ourselves there? What about actions that have happened in the past? If I know what somebody did in the past, does that mean that I force that person to do what they did in the past? Why should that connection only apply to things that happen in the future? Why doesn't it apply to things that happen in the past? So, just as it sounds unreasonable and illogical for you when I say that my knowledge of the past forced people to do what they did in the past, it's just as unreasonable to say that God's knowledge of the future forces people to do things in the future. So knowledge of the past does not invalidate the free will of past events. In the same way, God's knowledge of the future does not invalidate the free will of people in the future. So the argument makes a whole bunch of assumptions that are not rational, that are not based in fact. The reality is, we have the ability to make the choices that we want. We just don't have the knowledge of the future to know what choice we're going to make. But since God is not limited by the restrictions of time, He knows what's going to happen in the future just as easily as He knows what happened in the past. So the next major question that people ask has to do with the existence of evil in the world. The argument says that if God exists, then evil should not exist, because a good God would get rid of evil. They say, since there's evil in the world, it means that God does not exist. If there's a God, well, obviously He wouldn't want to stop that evil, correct? So there's two kinds of evil inherent in this argument. They're talking about evil in the natural world, like natural disasters, and they're talking about evil in human actions, the wars and murder and tyranny and all that. As we have explained many times so far, and I don't think we need to repeat it, is that there is no evil in the natural world because, one, it is rationally impossible for God to commit evil, and two, the natural world does not have free will. Earthquakes, the earth doesn't have free will to say, you know what, I don't like this group of people over here, so I'm going to drop that mountain on top of them. The earth doesn't have free will like this. So evil only comes about if there is a choice to be made based on a standard of good and evil. Since there's no free will, no choice in the natural world, there's no question of evil in the natural world. It is irrelevant, it is inapplicable to say that there's evil in the natural world. So as for human actions, our response is that everything, and this might sound strange at first, but if we think about it, the progression is logical and reasonable. We say that everything in this universe is evidence for the existence of God, even the possibility of evil. Now the argument is, since evil exists, God does not exist. We say the opposite. We say that even the possibility of evil is a proof for the existence of God. Now how does this work out? What is evil? Evil is a deviation from a standard. Correct? Evil means that we have moved away from the standard of good and evil. However, before we can deviate from the standard, that standard must already exist. How can I do something the wrong way if there's no right way to do it? How can I do something the wrong way if I don't know what the right way to do it? So, there must be a right way established to do something so that if I do it in any way different than that, then I'm doing it in the wrong way. So there must be a standard of good and evil already in place. An objective standard of good and evil, not one that I made up by myself, because then it wouldn't count. There must be an objective law that exists before I can break that law. If there's no law, how am I breaking a law? If there's no question of legal and illegal, how can I be a criminal? So evil is not possible unless morality already exists, and no objective morality means no evil. Therefore, the possibility of evil proves the existence of an objective morality. Okay, this is our first step. If evil is possible, it means that we have assumed the reality of an objective morality. Now, morality itself requires free will. There's no morality unless we actually have the ability to choose between right and wrong. So there's no free will in nature because nature is compelled by natural law. So morality must come from outside of nature. It must be supernatural. The morality must be objective, so it cannot come from our opinions or desires. So morality must come from beyond the human being. The source of morality must be supernatural, it must be independently existing, and it must be intelligent in order to create the system. And we call this supernatural, intelligent being who writes the system of morality, we call by the name of God. So therefore, the existence of morality proves the existence of God. Now we summarize our findings. This is basic math. If A leads to B and B leads to C, then A leads to C, correct? So now we summarize our findings. The possibility of evil proves the existence of morality. The existence of morality proves the existence of God. Therefore, the possibility of evil proves the existence of God. There's no escaping it. Everything that we're talking about when we talk about theology and monotheism, belief in God, is basically just to show what is completely and absolutely obvious, and that is that God exists, that there's only one God, that He is just, and that He's merciful. All of these things, no matter what it is in this universe, even evil and the possibility of evil itself, are proof for the existence of God. In addition, when we're talking about evil, we have free will. We decide what we do, so we can't blame God for our actions. If God forced us to do good, then we wouldn't have free will anymore. And finally, to classify something as evil has no meaning without an independent standard. So for the atheist to accuse God of evil, he must first assume the existence of an objective morality. There must be a standard by which he is accusing God. So morality requires free will that is independent of nature. So to make the case against God from evil, the atheist must believe in the supernatural. So without the belief in the supernatural, this argument is invalid right from the start. And it is also impossible and unrational that we can judge something as evil because of our ignorance. And this is basically what the atheist is doing. If we had greater knowledge, or if we had a better perspective, we might think differently. Whenever we say, for example, that something is near or something is far, this is defining things according to ourselves. It's all in relation to us. So judgments that we make are subjective like this, and they're not based on reality. So for example, when there's a heavy rain shower, what do? We only think about how it affects us and not how it affects other people. So we talk about how it ruined my day, I couldn't go outside, it made driving terrible, and on and on and on. Or for example, let's say the streets are full of potholes. When the streets are full of potholes, we complain, why doesn't anybody fix these? And then when they're actually working on the potholes, we complain about the traffic and why don't they finish fast enough? So we should be fair and admit that our knowledge of the world is too limited to pass a judgment of evil against God. There's so many ways that this entire argument is flawed, because to even make this argument, you have to assume that morality exists and you have to assume that God exists. So from the very beginning, it's completely irrational. The only rational and reasonable intellectual conclusion that we can draw from all of this is that God exists and that He is the most obvious thing in the world. So if brothers and sisters have any questions, I believe that that's good enough for today. And that'll be the end of our 3-day discussion. You guys have my email. If you want to continue the discussion, we can set up some other series, inshallah, in the future. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.